Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere and welcome to this week's episode of The Niche Cast. This is our regular Thursday Aotearoa sporting podcast where we do like to have a big old kōrero and just explore a few Aotearoa sporting topics. We've got plenty about the All Blacks. We got a little bit more about the All Blacks, and then apparently an All Blacks coach is now coaching Australia, so shout out to him. And we will not be discussing any of that today because we actually have a bit of Kiwi cricket to digest. Blackcaps are in England, and there's a series tour against the Aussies coming up, and so we'll chat a wee bit about that. And of course, the biggest World Cup happening right now is the All Blacks at the Basketball World Cup, and they start that on Sunday morning. So we'll chat about that. We've got a Warriors versus Dragons game, Niche Case Derby, which the Warriors will absolutely roll through the Dragons. So we'll talk about that and some other Kiwi NRL matters. Maybe a bit of NRLW as well, because we do have a few funky selections there with the inclusion of Noaria Boss Kapua. Her nickname or just alternative name is Boss. So shout out to Boss Kapua. She picked up a contract with the Parramatta Eels midweek, and now she is named to come off the bench for the Parramatta Eels. Also got Tafito Lafaele, former Black Fern, who hasn't played for the Broncos yet. She's named on the Broncos bench. So if we get to discussing some NRLW, I'll touch on those a bit more. And we have football. The Phoenix are in the Aussie Cup. They're about to win Australia's greatest cup. And we've got here domestic football finals as well. So we'll touch on those things, maybe a bit of flying Kiwis sprinkled in, because we do know, fresh off the Women's World Cup, Kiwis are scoring goals, Kiwis are stopping goals. Like the Kiwi goalkeepers at the moment are almost as ahi, fuego, fire, lit as the goal scorers. Like the goal scorers are bagging goals, men and women, but these goalies, like that Max Crocombe highlights package was just as impressive as Zach Jones. And so,
or Nick Sarnev's won the other week as well.
Yeah, crikey, Jack. There's a lot of Kiwi goalies doing great things around the world as well. So we'll see how we go, try and cover those topics, and just spread the positive vibes. That's what we're here to do. We love Aotearoa. We love Aotearoa sport. And we are from the Niche Case, theniche-case.com. Check that out, the website. All that NRLW stuff, there is a big preview that you can read about, so check that out. Also got a Warriors versus Dragons preview that is live. Got a Blackcaps notebook after their UAE series. And, of course, Flying Kiwis is live on our website at the moment as well. All of which is designed just to drop as much information as we have and help you enjoy those Aotearoa sporting things that are happening at the moment. Of course, we do big up the Patreon whānau and those with a paid Substack subscription as well. Those people support the Niche Case directly, and we appreciate it a lot. It's basically our main revenue at the moment, although it's not a whole lot, but we're incredibly grateful. And those people have access to the subscriber podcast. So our subscriber podcast that we recorded on Tuesday had a fair bit of Warriors information and Blackcaps, and we drop that every Tuesday along with the variety show that you can access on YouTube or on the podcast platforms. Patreon and a paid Substack subscription are the easiest ways to support the Niche Case directly. Big up to everyone who has done that, and if you are reading or listening or perusing the Niche Case and you like what you see on our mission to highlight some of these other Aotearoa sporting pockets, support us via Patreon, support us via a paid Substack subscription, or just tell a friend. Just be nice to each other. Subscribe on YouTube, jam the audio podcast if that's more your buzz, and our Substack newsletter, that's completely free. Comes out every Monday and Friday. We write things about Aotearoa sport just for those newsletters, and you can then upgrade to a paid Substack subscription as well. It's basically the Niche Case sent straight to you via carrier tui. We start our podcast with a bit of mindfulness. Chieftain, what do you got?
Got a doozy from Carl Jung. I did promise some Carl Jung ones a couple of weeks ago, although I am just thinking about the logistics of a carrier TUI right now as well. I don't know that they're quite. I was thinking more like carrier. I was going to say carrier kakapo, but I don't think they fly enough.
We do joke about this every time we bring up a carrier pigeon, carrier tui, carrier pukeko, whatever it is. We do love our native birds, and I'm sure if we needed help, the native birds would be there to help us, no matter what those birds are. Because I don't even think the pukeko can fly that far, to be honest.
Not that far. Carrier keru would be pretty good. They are pigeon. They are a form of wood pigeon after all, so that wouldn't go all right. But anyway, on Carl Jung, modern man does not understand how much his rationalism has put him at the mercy of the psychic underworld. And then a thing from the end of that paragraph as well to explain that a little bit more. It says his moral and spiritual tradition has disintegrated. Bloody rationalism, eh?
Well, I think because that's something it's to bring it into a more grounded sense. Like the rationalism to me is just like trying to common sense is great, except when you're dealing and you're trying to explain the magical realms with your common sense. Like your brain's trying to figure out how it's all going to happen, how this is going to happen, how that's going to happen, how this person's going to come in, how that person's going to go away, how you're going to manifest this and this is going to happen. And when this happens, you can do this. And can it even happen? Because I don't know how it's going to happen. Like none of those dots can actually be rationally connected to each other. So as soon as you try and rationalize those things, then you're moving away from the magic.
Yeah, and the process of rationalization can be a very reductive thing too. Like you oversimplify stuff in order to be able to explain it because you, for some I suppose, human egotistical reason, you feel the need to understand everything that goes around you, despite lacking, I guess, the humility of knowing that you can't actually understand stuff. Like you understand some stuff, you can't understand everything. Like there isn't capacity for that, and we lack the reason. But there is definitely I don't know, rationalism definitely seems to be something that's come about very strongly in the last couple hundred years of Western society, where those the traditional spiritual elements, and not just spiritual elements, but I think moral was another word he used in that as well. Like these things get explained away, but they're actually quite important parts of the human experience, and without them, I don't know. I think probably as a society can become a little bit rudderless.
The rationalism also makes you feel smart because your
Which is an ego
brain,
thing again, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
because your brain's figuring things out. Your brain is deploying logic and connecting the dots. And so it's like, yeah, I can figure this out. My brain and my ego's like got everything mapped out, when the reality is that's not the case, because whatever you've mapped out in your head probably doesn't happen. And then you realize you're an idiot
Yeah.
and so on.
I forgot to carry the two in that equation.
Cricket, Blackcaps cricket. I did think because the Blackcaps, they every time they're overseas or on a tour, they add some more coaches, and I was like thinking about that. We are rather cynical about some of these bodies, but I was thinking it just seems like a good kind of development activity, especially cricket, where it's been a topic of conversation a lot in my time watching cricket. It's like, what does the head coach for a cricket team actually do? But when you're building a cricket program, as the Blackcaps have done, having different insights, different people, offering their expertise, I think it is beneficial, and that is amplified. And I kind of worked my way to this point where I think I enjoy the Blackcaps program at the moment, like their development and how they build everything into the top tier Blackcaps. Top tier Blackcaps is major tournament Blackcaps, first 11 Test cricket Blackcaps, and everything around that kind of just funnels into that upper echelon of Blackcaps cricket. So as much as I do want to poke fun at having new assistant coaches for every tour, because now you got Stephen Fleming and like Ian Bell or something, and that's fine. It's actually cool. Like those people are adding the to the system, to the program. But at the same time, you've had like Aditya Ashok and Dean Foxcroft called up to the Blackcaps. I think they're going to play the tour games against Worcestershire and Gloucestershire in England this weekend. Then they will go to the New Zealand A team, who are playing 2 tests and then a couple of ODIs, 3 ODIs. First test, unofficial test, that starts next Monday. So when you kind of work through this, you can see a pretty well-designed Blackcaps development structure. And I do want to just highlight that because I settled on it recently. So this seems to be working out pretty well. And I think it definitely is working out well. We do have a strong record of highlighting when these organizations don't do things well. But I think in this case, the Blackcaps are doing things pretty well. And I am interested in this New Zealand A squad strictly for the longer format at the moment. When we get to the one-dayers, I'll preview that. But there are the veterans, right? There are the dudes who add their mana and their experience to this group. Tom Bruce, Cam Fletcher, Scott Kugelheim, Sean Solier, Ajaz Patel, Jacob Duffy's in that category as well. But the youngsters here that I'm most interested in, like you've got Ashok and Foxcroft. They should be aiming to be the best players in this tour, coming back from the Blackcaps experience. Mohamed Abbas continues to enjoy a swift promotion. He made his debut last summer, and now he is getting a couple A gigs, which is good for him. So shout out to him. And there's also Will O'Rourke, tall Canterbury seamer, who I talked a lot about last summer. Mitchell Hay, Canterbury wicketkeeper. Josh Clarkson, who was instrumental in helping Central Districts win the Plunket Shield and Ford Trophy. He's there as well. So that's kind of my funky group that I'm most interested in for the series. Brett Randall, very interesting seamer as well, but he's a bit older, but he's coming into the A system for one of their tours. So there are Clarkson's 26 years old, Mitch Hayes 23, Will O'Rourke's 22, Mohamed Abbas would be 19, 20 years old. But of course, we don't care about the ages because it's all about, experience and where you are in the Blackcaps pecking order. But this is a very interesting A group with the experienced campaigners leading some pretty interesting young talent.
Yeah, and that's like, because a couple of years ago they cut back the Plunket Shield by 2 rounds. Like, it used to be just home and away against everyone. There's 6 teams, so that's 10 games, and they cut it down to 8 games. And that was something that was quite controversial amongst cricketing fans at the time. And I would say I certainly wasn't. I was certainly opposed to that concept of shortening the aspect of the domestic season, which probably is the best development pathway for play. Well, pathway, but opportunities. That's when you learn the most about your cricket, is playing the long form stuff. But to their credit, and I guess this isn't entirely balanced out, because I don't see why you can't have both. But to their credit, one of the things New Zealand cricket did when they cut the Plunket Shield back was reinvested some of that money in boosting up an A program, which they've had that. Obviously, there's always been A tours and second 11 stuff and the history of cricket, right? But that's certainly something that that the Blackcaps men's side of New Zealand cricket in particular made a big point of around that same time, is getting the A program, regular tours every summer. And I think it has been something that's been quite successful for them, is giving that little bridge between domestic cricket and international cricket, bringing the best the best domestic players below the Blackcaps squads, bringing them together and getting them working with each other, and playing against some decent touring teams in some examples, going on tour in other examples. Like, it's been something they've put effort into, and it's, I don't know, I think that has been quite successful. Most of the guys that you're seeing coming into the Blackcaps as newer faces over the last few years have usually done so coming through A tours. Like that's it's also very helpful for us as well, as because we get to see where the thinking is. Like who are the next guys in line? Well, they've picked an A tour, so they've told us who the next guys in line are. We already know this now. And it's always interesting to see which dudes make that step up because there's only so many spots available in Black Cap squads. So when you get A tours, it just expands that out a little bit more. So you get to understand that thinking. You get to see that milestone of someone going from, yeah, I've been like Clarkson, for example. I almost said Jordan Clarkson because I've been thinking about basketball. But Josh Clarkson, for example, finished the last season so well. And now he's playing A cricket. You know, like if there's a progression there in his career that we can now see where it's like if there were only Black Caps tours things, you don't see that until they get to that like 3 or 4 steps further down the line, which might not even happen for someone in that position because again, only so many spots going around for the Black Caps. And a lot of that stuff just is sometimes is opportunistic of where they're going on tour at what time and who's available, who's playing IPL or 100 or whatever at the time, and which positions are needed, that kind of stuff. So it's to your first point basically about how the Black Caps have. I think a lot of this does come down to having a very sturdy first 11 as well. Like when you have that stuff sorted, like they for the 5 or 6 years they've been a very good cricket team in most formats, in all formats at some point. But in particular, their test team's been quite strong for a number of years now. They were the inaugural World Test champions after all. And when you've got that stability from your first 11, you're not trying to solve problems with stuff in there. You just it just flows naturally, and you have the room therefore to start building on your depth a bit and working on some of the pathways for coaches as well as players, as you say. Like I think it's a reflection of a stable and successful team is when that stuff starts to come through. Because I look at this in other sports where a lot of the times, like a football team starts struggling, and then it's like, okay, well, we're going to pick all the kids now because the older guys suck, so we're going to promote some academy players. And that's not necessarily the best environment for academy players to come through. Like the teams who are the strongest teams are often the ones with the best academies because everything's just in alignment and resourced well, and you're not trying to, the problem solving stuff I'm talking about. You're not trying to do that about, well, this young kid is here, but we need a center back, so maybe we'll try. Like just people get to come in a pressure free environment when things are successful and flowing. And the Black Caps have seemingly had that for a few years. There's obviously been ups and downs with results and whatever, but in the bigger picture, they've been stable and successful for a number of years, and this is what that starts to look like when you take advantage of that situation. I think they're doing a good job of that. So yeah, like, pucky to the Black Caps.
It will be interesting. I think Neil Wagner is going to be playing county cricket over the next few weeks while the Black Caps are in England. So that will be interesting. Another player I was thinking about was Henry Shipley, the Black Caps' best ODI bowler this year. Apparently he was in the UAE squad, but didn't play. And I'm going to be tracking whether he does pop up for Sussex when county cricket resumes. I think there's 3, maybe 4 rounds of county championship cricket coming up once England finishes their, jolly old white ball tournament phase. So I'm going to be obviously tracking Neil Wagner very closely. Where Henry Shipley pops up will be interesting. And that's especially interesting now that Will O'Rourke is getting promotion. And we've talked a lot about him, tall seamer from Canterbury. Kyle Jamieson is going back to Canterbury. So now Canterbury have their 3 tall abnormal seamers all together. Jamieson, Henry Shipley, Will O'Rourke. I find that quite exciting for the domestic summer. And another quick note here about Ashok, Aditya Ashok, the young leggy. He has been able to work with Mitchell Santner, and I think he'll be around Ish Sodhi as well in England. Then he goes to the A series where he'll be working with Ajaz Patel. And you can make that kind of note about the seamers, like a young seamer like Will O'Rourke or Henry Shipley, Ben Lister as well. They're getting exposure to all the great seamers and spinners and batters in the Black Cap setup, which I think is another development tick for them. Sunday morning, we will have our first Black Cap, Tall Blacks, Not the Blackcaps, the Tall Blacks. Although Sunday morning, no, that's Saturday morning. Yeah, the Blackcaps won't be action on Sunday morning, but the Tall Blacks will be in action at the Basketball World Cup. They are taking on the USA, and the USA have been playing pretty well by the sounds of it in their warm-up games with not a Super Saiyan all-star USA cast, but that's very good. Like, you've still got Anthony Edwards, Paolo Banchero, Jaren Jackson Jr., Stephen Adams' teammate, Jalen Brunson, Tyrese Halliburton, like a lot of very good up-and-coming NBA players are in that USA squad. And the Tall Blacks are probably going to lose that game. Let's just be straight up about it. But they will back up the next day, Monday night, against Jordan. So if the Tall Blacks lose against USA, you know, that one goes to the gods. That one goes to Ranganui and Papatuanuku. Then they come up back against Jordan, a couple days later against Greece. And those are the two games the Tall Blacks will be really eager to win. But starting against the USA, I think myself and you, having watched you've watched the Tall Blacks and followed the Tall Blacks closely over the last week or so throughout many losses on tour. Against the USA, you're probably just looking for signs of competitive life to then set up the games against Jordan and Greece, because right now it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like defeating Jordan and defeating Greece are certainties. Like, the Tall Blacks will have to be very good to win those games, and they haven't been winning a whole lot of late. So you'd like to see some promising signs, some green sprouts in the game against USA.
Yeah, the Tall Blacks had, I think they played Japan first and they lost the first game, but then they won the second game. Then they lost to Canada and China. China was a close one. Canada, they got thrashed. And then they played a Chinese CBA team and beat them, but then lost to Italy. And so I think that's the sum of their warm-up performances. So basically, whenever they've played international teams, they won one against Japan in a rematch there, the second of two games that they played against them, but they've lost all the other games against international sides, which is not, you know, it's a little bit of a concern. But I think also to clarify some of that stuff, like they did, Shaley and Isaac Fotu were on limited minutes to start. Well, they didn't play at all to start with, and then sort of more limited later on. Definitely, the rotations were not what we'll see at the World Cup. It was hard to see much of any of these games because only like one or two of them were available for broadcast. But you know, Basketball NZ did some pretty good write-ups on the things, so you get an idea of the stats and the trends and whatever. And certainly the box scores were available, so you get to see the rotations at least to some extent. Where you could see, because this was still with a 14-man squad, they haven't yet announced, I don't think, the two more players will be cut from that. So I'm not sure who that'll be yet. But definitely Pero Cameron was trying to get as many players minutes and giving them opportunities to prove themselves and just keeping everyone fit and ready and whatnot and up to speed. And when you get to the World Cup itself, you know, Shaley's playing 30 minutes. Isaac Fotu's playing 30 plus minutes every one of these games. You know, like it's not going to be a case where everyone gets 15 to 20 minutes. You're tightening up with your best players playing more often in the combinations that they're used to. Combinations is a tricky one, though. I think that's another reason the USA one will be quite good, because if you do give everyone an extent, like to have that game first up, I mean, rather than later on, because it is a free hit, kind of like you expect to lose, no dramas. We can go out there and give those rotations their first real extended go together, and you know, a starting lineup that's going to include like Shaley and Finn Delaney and some of these guys who've maybe been to previous World Cups but haven't been like the star players at previous World Cups, and now they're here to carry the team to some extent, which they kind of have to do because there's no Webster brothers here for the first time in a long time. And those are not only two key sort of veteran players in the squad, but also they're probably your two best scorers. And if you don't have that, you're going to have to, you know, spread the spread the wealth around between a bunch of different players, which I do think they have the capability to do. Like, rather than having someone who's going to go out there and score 30 points in any given night, it's a little bit more about, let's see if we can get 4 to 5 guys with in that 10 to 15 range kind of thing, and just win that way with a team effort that spreads things around on the back of what we can reasonably expect, I think, because even in those games where they lost a lot of them, defensively they seemed pretty handy, except against Canada. But Canada is stacked. Like, that's a team that's competing for the title at this World Cup. So, like, like defensively they were pretty solid against most of the other times. So when you get into these games against Jordan and Greece, and in particular, you would hope they can keep them down within a realm of scoring to where the Tall Blacks can do their, like, spreading it around, chipping in here, there, and everywhere, and just doing enough. Turnovers were the big issue in those things, as I sort of detailed on the variety show the other day. Like, whenever they lost, there were just big turnover things, and hopefully Shaley being a more prominent role in the games that matter will help that, because he is their main ball handler, and he is a sort of, key veteran leader out there. He is someone who's hopefully not going to be taking silly risks and throwing the ball away and whatever. So there's reason for, like, not concern, but just at least pumping the brakes on maybe, okay, this is maybe a little bit of a Tall Black squad that's kind of trying to figure things out a little bit. They don't have a lot of the players they've relied on for the last 5 to 10 years, and this is a little bit of the next step in the evolution. But at the same time, there's reasons to think that some of the stuff we saw, particularly with some of them defeats and the high turnovers, blowing a couple fourth quarter leads. I think Italy and China were the case there. Some of that negative stuff from the preparation. There's reason also to think that won't necessarily be the case at the World Cup, because there were warm up game asterisks over that with rotations and players and whatever. I'm not as optimistic as I was maybe this time a year ago, just thinking about the general trajectory of Kiwi basketball and how that would hopefully be reflected at this World Cup, because they don't have all of their best players available. But, it's still Tall Blacks at the World Cup, so there's still a level of mana and energy and commitment that you're going to get from any Tall Blacks team. Like, that's just always going to be the case, because that's the culture of this side. And I'm now cautiously optimistic that they'll turn it up. Jordan is a team they usually beat, and they have beaten them with weakened teams in Asia Cup, and I think they beat them for third place at an Asia Cup not that long ago, and World Cup qualifying they played them a little bit, so they're used to playing Jordan. Obviously it's different at a World Cup, but that's a familiar opponent. And Greece are tough. Greece are very tough. I would say Greece would be favorites against the Tall Blacks for sure. However, they don't have Giannis Antetokounmpo. Like, they don't have the one guy who would have turned that into a unstoppable juggernaut, which does make it a more competitive game. So we'll see how that goes.
So, but go back to the USA game. Probably going to lose that game. What do we want to see? Minimal turnovers would be ideal, because you're playing a high quality opponent who are probably going to first force a few turnovers. So if the Tall Blacks can have less turnovers against the USA, I think that's a promising sign. And you're also probably going to struggle to score points. As you said, with the players they have, it's not like necessarily conducive to scoring 100 points regularly, let alone against the best team in the tournament. So,
well, also when you look at who the USA have, like that team, because it's not Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Steph Curry, all the superstars. What they've got is, like, unreal defenders across the board. They've just picked all the solid, like, the third best player on every NBA team kind of thing, which I actually think is kind of dangerous, because it's not hyped up, but it is. Those guys aren't going to have off days,
As I said, they are the best team in the tournament. Like, they're the USA basketball team for a reason. And if you can score points against them, that's going to be a good sign. So turnovers, minimal turnovers, and signs of scoring points against the USA, I think, are key indicators of a promising Tall Blacks campaign. Is there anything else that stands out as far as, like, what you'll be watching for specifically against the USA?
Well, let me just find the Tall Black squad here. It will be interesting to see who those two players that get cut are. I think looking at that, there's a likelihood of maybe one of the big guys and probably a guard. So I don't know. It might be like, well, we'll see. We'll leave that up to Pero Cameron. I'm
Yeah,
not
I'm
going to
speaking like
speculate on
just
that.
watching
But
the basketball game against USA. What are you going to be watching for in that game as signs of optimism, aside from turnovers and points?
yeah, well, the reason I was thinking of that is because I was wondering like who might be the young dudes who are suddenly because like okay, you don't have the Webster brothers. They weren't able to get Steven Adams back, even though they maybe emotionally got Steven Adams back. They didn't physically get him back because his knee's busted. So Sam Wardenberg isn't there. Tom Abercrombie and Rob Lowe have retired, right? So there's a list of half a squad right there who's unavailable. Well, then there's six players who weren't going to be in a first choice World Cup squad who suddenly are now. That means there are going to be guys who and I don't know, maybe Dan Fortu is someone like that. Maybe I think Isaiah Liafa will be someone like that. Perhaps if Walter Brown sneaks in there, definitely think Yanni Wetzel will be someone who falls into this category. Like guys who are going to get bigger minutes than they might otherwise. Flynn Cameron as well, for sure. Flynn Cameron, because he's also a big game player. He's done this for Tall Blacks teams in the past, despite his youth and inexperience. So guys like that, like who, because clearly when you're missing key contributors from recent Tall Blacks, teams, you're missing those guys. Someone has to fill that void. And I talked about the scoring can be spread out amongst, but it's still a case of like, okay, well, is someone who might not have otherwise been playing, is Flynn Cameron going to be able to come in and just score 10 points per game kind of thing? I kind of think he might be. Like, I have big raps on Flynn Cameron, and this could be a huge
Just
tournament for him
zone
if
in on
that's
the
the
USA
case.
though. Like against USA,
Well,
if Flynn Cameron
that's the
scores 10
first
points against
opportunity
the
you see
USA,
this. Is,
yeah, like that, that's good.
yeah, like there's the first opportunity we'll get to see their full rotation and which of those younger, newer, more inexperienced players are going to be asked to do that role and who is going to, like, we'll get hints of who's going to be capable of it. Because if you can do it against the USA, you can do it against Jordan and Greece, right?
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty comprehensive kind of preview of the USA game there with turnovers. Lack of turnovers
Yeah.
is good. Who scores points is going to be interesting, and who gets the minutes, because there are young players hunting minutes, and if they get minutes against the USA, if they score points against the USA, if they don't have turnovers against the USA, that's how they're going to defeat Jordan and Greece. Also, sneaky bit of breakers spotting with some local lads. Shout out the Breakers. They've brought in some local lads into their squad. I think Kalman Poto, Carlin Davison, and Max Darling. That is a fantastic trio of NBL players. Are they going to be playing for the Breakers this season, you reckon, hard and fast? Or is that just kind of bring them in, shuffle them out? Because we know Breakers are renowned for not liking players from New Zealand.
Yeah, well, I suspect it's bring him in and shuffle him out because there are obviously Tall Blacks players right now who are with the Breakers who are not part of preseason because they're away with the Tall Blacks, you know? So I suspect there's a strong likelihood that they're just picking the best domestic players around saying, come in. Yeah, it's a little bit of a trial for you. We'll see how it goes. But we mostly just need you to like we need you to do the thing that these guys do in our training so we can prep the team kind of thing. Like Carla Davison come in and beat Dan Fotu for us because he's not around kind of thing. I do think there's a chance though, like because Carlin Davison, I think, is eligible to be a DP. I think Max Darling might be as well, but I'm not sure because he's had a previous NBL contract. I'm not entirely sure how this stuff works. What I will say, the Breakers have no open spots on their full roster. So they've only got development. They've got 2 development spots available, but they usually only use the one, which goes to Alec Benoit at the moment. He has that. They should be using more than one DP role. Like, you think that's the obvious thing for a Kiwi basketball team. The only professional team would be to sign at least get a couple of DPs in there for some professional experience, even if you don't play them. But They don't tend to do that. So, but there is a possibility, and Davison is certainly someone who's had some NBL buzz around him. And Max Starling, as they say, has been there before. Dom Calvin Potto's been a Breakers DP in the past as well. Like there's possibility there. We'll see how that goes, though. They could also be signed as injury replacement players, so where it's like, if an injury happens, you come up. They did that with Jaden Bazant last year, so he trained with the team a lot, but wasn't actually in the team until someone got injured, and then he kitted up, and then they came back, and he wasn't there anymore. But there's possibility like that. It's nice to see those guys around and getting the experience, even if it's nothing else. Though it's still better than nothing.
The Niche Case Derby goes down at Mount Smart Stadium. We're back to Mount Smart Stadium after the big man Daniel Anderson round, so shout out to him. And shout out to the Warriors. They take on the Dragons. Dragons who kind of suck. No disrespect, Nico the Wildcard Dragons fan here with me.
A little bit of disrespect because you used the word kinda.
The Dragons,
I think that's inaccurate.
suck. No, no caveats or anything there. And this will be another interesting game for the Warriors. Expect a big crowd. And I have got an additional distillation. Another putting these last 3 wins for the Warriors through the filtration system. And, just you don't really like filtered water is good, but you also want to expose your gut microbiome to unfiltered water as well. So just for all the listeners out there, don't worry if you're not filtering your water, but I do like to filter and distill Warriors performances out into key insights. The variety show was all about big crowds and a finals atmosphere that the Warriors have been up to their neck in. So if you want to explore that take, you can check out the variety show where I lay it all out. Big crowds, finals atmosphere, honkadori. One thing I did realize is that the last 3 games, the Warriors have played those teams for the first time this season. First time playing the Titans. First time playing the Tigers. First time playing the Sea Eagles. Now, we had also built up this idea that all 3 of those teams are quirky, out of the box, attacking teams with plenty to play for. They are not easy games, right? I think the Dragons are an easier game than those 3 teams. The Dragons don't have that attacking funk. They don't have the willy-nilly approach. They're just not as good at rugby league. And I would say the Bulldogs are another team like that, where they just got a bit of a rot in their club. The thing about the Dragons is that the Warriors have played them before. And I think not having any game experience against the Titans, Tigers, or Sea Eagles might have made those games closer, might have helped make those games tighter affairs. Like the Warriors don't have a previous game to fall back on as far as like sussing out the weaknesses and approach to those games. So I would like to add that to the 3 wins in a row, finals atmosphere, gritty wins, patient wins against quirky attacking teams. Playing each of those teams for the first time helped that idea. Dragons, as we know, the Warriors smoked them over in Australia. And the Warriors, I think they've got a pretty idea of the weaknesses on offer in the Dragons lineup. I think they know how they can break down the Dragons. They know the threats that the Dragons pose. Like we did see Tyrell Sloan, I think he might have zipped around. It might have been Pompey in that game over in Sydney. Like the Warriors have been exposed to Tyrell Sloan this season. They have been exposed to the Dragons systems this season. They have also already scored 40 odd points against the Dragons this season. And in reflection of the last 3 wins, I think the fact that the Warriors had played the Titans, Tigers, and Sea Eagles for the first time this season, I do think that is relevant for how those games went. And I think the fact that the Warriors have played the Dragons already this season, and this is going to be another finals atmosphere, like Mount Smart's going to be fizzing, might get 25,000 people, maybe. I don't know, but you'll definitely get at least 20,000 people. And I think this feels more like a celebration game where the Warriors can just roll through their processes, roll through their systems. And I do not think this is going to be a gritty, patient performance from the Warriors. I think this is going to be domination from go to woe.
Yeah, woe on the side of the Dragons in that equation. Like I will say one thing for the Dragons is that they haven't been thrashed very often this season. Like they've not been a very good team, but they've had a lot of close, a lot of close losses where it's like they're in the mix, they're just not good enough to get over the line, which it's not good, but it could have been worse. You know what I mean? Like there was a spell when they were losing by just 1 to 2 to maximum like 4 points for about 5 games in a row, which is like at that point it's almost not even talent. It's like they've sacked that coach since then, so that's a big part of it. It's also just like the confidence and the just not quite having the everyone on the same page and pulling in the same direction. Like when you get to small margins, there are ways to overcome that stuff, and they have not been able to do that all season. But they haven't had many thrashings, and they were competitive for a while against the Melbourne Storm till Will Warbrick started running straight, basically. That's something at least in the Dragons' favor. However, one of the games in which they have been thrashed was the time when they played the Warriors last time. So perhaps that sort of it's not resilience, but at least there's a little bit of defensive structure there. Doesn't really count because they're playing against one of the teams who have ripped to the pieces with that same formula.
To be fair, it wasn't just Will Warbrick tearing up the Dragons last week.
Jerome Hughes was unreal too.
It was Jerome Hughes, it was Ilyasar Katoa, it was the Storm's right edge against the Dragons' left edge. What happened when the Warriors played the Dragons in Sydney earlier in the season? The Warriors' right edge tore up the Dragons' left edge, and I think that's going to be the recipe once again. I did highlight in my preview on our website, theniche-case.com, the Battle of the Centers will be very interesting, because Rocco Berry's going to be lining up against Moses Sully. I like that matchup for Berry because he's a big physical center who wraps blokes up. He's maybe the best way to view Rocco Berry is like one of those, like not a sticky note, but like a suction thing that you put on the window. That's Rocco Berry. As soon as you get near him, he's just right on you, sucks you up, and I think he's going to be stuck to that Moses Sully window all game. But on the other side of the field, you have Zach Lomax versus Adam Pompey, and I think it's an opportunity for Adam Pompey just to flex a bit of defensive prowess, and that is part of this other idea of the Warriors. Like if you split the team into middle, right, left, I would say attack and defense, the Warriors' right edge is ranked first, their middle is second, their left is third. So the right edge, they score a lot of tries. I think that right edge is pretty solid defensively. Middle, and I will say, as we've always talked about, the middle is probably the most important though. Like everything that happens on the right edge starts in the middle. So I might have the middle ranked first just as far as the importance of that goes. Either way, the left edge is third. They are third for scoring points. They have, scored a few good tries recently. Pompey scored against the Tigers. Nice pass from Johnson. And their defense hasn't been as good on the left edge either. So you're going to have Pompey defending Lomax, which will be a fascinating matchup. And you've also got to change there with Jackson Ford going back to the bench with Josh Curran starting. To me, that just seems like rest and rotation, workload management. And we've talked about that for the last few weeks as well. Where's Tom Alley playing? He's playing big minutes in New South Wales Cup. What did Bunty Afoa do? He's had less minutes. He's been on the bench. He's been in New South Wales Cup. He's being managed. We talked about Dylan Walker, Jazz Tavanga, and their minutes they are getting or not getting. To me, it seems like this stage of the season, Andrew Webster's just rolling through different combinations and he's giving different players an opportunity. So it will be interesting to see how the Warriors left edge with Josh Curran defending their how they stop one of the best, most potent weapons for the Dragons, which is Zach Lomax at center as a offloading threat, running threat. And since Shane Flanagan, since he got the job to start coaching next year, but he's already doing stuff for the Dragons while he's Sea Eagles assistant coach, I do think Zach Lomax has played better footy. So we'll be interested in how Adam Pompey matches up against him. But I think the Warriors' forward pack is just far superior and they'll just roll through them and everything else will be great. The Dragons are also 0-11 away from home this season. Shout out to them, because there's a lot of noise right now about the Knights, right? The Knights have won 7 in a row. The Knights' home ground is amazing. Mount Smart is amazing. There's going to be 20,000 people there. The Dragons are 0-11 in away games this year. None of those have been as tough as going to Mount Smart Stadium, which I think sets it up quite nicely.
Yeah, I didn't realize the 0-11 thing. But then, you know, I've tried not to focus in too much on the ins and outs of Dragons results and stuff this season because they haven't been very good. The So would you say Pompey and Montoya are on the Lomax Ravalawa side? Is that right?
I believe so. Lomax hasn't played recently, but before he missed a couple of games,
yeah.
But when he was playing a couple of weeks ago, he was playing right center, I believe.
Yeah, because that was one of the things with the old coach was that he'd been playing him a left center so that he wouldn't do his little flick offload, but then and also to try strengthen that side defensively, but then it just nullified his strength and didn't work. So yeah, he has been back. Ravalawa right wing and Lomax right center, and that side's been pretty good. The Sully Matt Feagai side on the left for the Dragons has been awful. Like defensively in particular, because Sully is a big lad who runs the ball hard. Like that's solid. But those guys have been real, and that's the side that Will Warbrick scored a hat trick on as well. So they've been shocking defensively for all season, but in particular recently that's a worry, and that's the Rocco Berry and Watene-Zelezniak side, isn't it? And Watene-Zelezniak is the guy who scored 19 tries in his last 12 games. So I would suggest that's a rather worrying factor for the Dragons coming into this, and a extremely positive factor for the Warriors, where that's the side where they've been the best at scoring lately. And the Dragons have a clear weakness defensively on that side. I think we can expect Watene-Zelezniak to continue his, I think it's 6 games and counting with a try scoring streak, and it's 11 in the last 12. I think we can expect that to continue.
I believe it's very important to note, though, like the Storm thing, it was Jerome Hughes and Katoa as well.
Yeah,
and
you're right.
The Dragons left edge defensively, who I think Ben Hunt probably plays right edge. So you've got Amone and either Billy Burns or Dan Russell, neither of whom seem very good. They're going to be defending on that edge as well. And we know Sean Johnson's in the best season of his career, which is a cornerstone of that. The stone that the builder refused becomes the cornerstone, and that is Sean Johnson's defense. So I think the whole right edge for the Warriors, as we've always noted this season, Shans Nickel-Clockstar swoops on the right edge. He is primarily a right edge player, so in attack. But like that whole edge, whether it's Sean Johnson, Niokore, Josh Curran has been playing right edge when Niokore goes off, so I'll be interested in that rotation. Jackson Ford, for example, may come off the bench to play right edge in place of Marata Niokore, because all season Niokore has played 50, 60 minutes, and that's when Josh Curran comes on to play right edge. But it's about their whole edge up against the whole edge, and that's where the issue is for the Dragons, because Feagai and Sully, they have to deal with the like the mishaps that happen inside them,
Yeah.
and that also tells the story of the Warriors' left edge, because it's not that Marcelo Montoya sucks, or it's not that Adam Pompey sucks, or Luke Metcalf sucks, or Jackson Ford sucks, haven't played 80 minutes on that left edge all season. It's everything is connected. And that's where you get into pondering the return of Te Maire Martin, who was named in New South Wales Cup. And it's ideally, I think you want to, if Te Maire Martin if Andrew Webster views Te Maire Martin as a top 17 player for finals footy, I think he needs to play a game before finals footy for the Warriors. So that means that he will start next week. I think they are an away trip to the Dolphins. And I think Te Maire Martin is just a better player than Luke Metcalf, straight up and down, better defensively. He doesn't have the speed of Metcalf, but he's a fantastic ball player, fantastic runner. I think he's just a better rugby league player than Metcalf. And you don't want to put Te Maire Martin in for his return week 1 of the finals. You probably want to give him the last regular season game of the season. And then it's like, what? So that battle between Metcalf and Te Maire Martin is very interesting. And I think Te Maire Martin is a key cog in making that left edge more potent in attack, because he's a better ball player than Luke Metcalf, and also more solid defensively, because like his mana is pretty high. Like the effort he was putting in earlier in the season was blatant, and I just think he's a better player than Metcalf.
I'd imagine, I can't remember enough about the first few games of the season, but I imagine he brings a much bigger kicking option as well than Metcalf, right?
Not necessarily, because Metcalf did have a few more kicks against the Sea Eagles, and it's those punchy kicks that I was talking about with Shaun Johnson. Metcalf had a couple of them down the left edge. I think Te Maire Martin is a better player overall, so he does have a bigger kicking quiver, and he does have the same kicks, but Metcalf's a pretty good kicker, and he did show that against the Sea Eagles last week, so either way, I don't think it matters given how much kicking Shaun Johnson does. Like, both of them are alternative options. In the same way, Wade Egan can kick out a dummy half if he needs to, but ultimately Shaun Johnson is going to be doing most of the kicks. And it's also, I was thinking, like, it's pretty good right now, because I think a lot of Warriors fans, they might be frustrated. I do tap into this a wee bit. It's like the Warriors have won 6 in a row, but it's all about the Knights, right? Because they've won 7 in a row. Let alone people realizing that home field advantage matters. The Warriors didn't have home field advantage for 2 or 3 years. All of that stuff. Right now, you don't want anyone in Australia talking about the Warriors. Because we want to sneak under the radar, we want to surprise teams and surprise Australians, but also, who are the Australians talking about right now? It's clubs in turmoil. And that's a good thing for the Warriors, because they are not in turmoil. Everything looks pretty solid for the Warriors. And I do feel like during that pandemic phase, which we know was absolute mayhem, and I don't really want to judge anyone involved in the Warriors from that pandemic phase, but people were pretty off Cameron George. There was a lot of like niggle about the owner and how involved in just his antics. All of that just doesn't matter at all right now, because the Warriors are pretty solid. They're a solid business operation. They're a fantastic development club. The NRL team is solid. And whether it's the Rabbitohs, whether it's the Tigers, the Dragons were in turmoil for a little bit there. There's no shortage of idiotic Australian antics in the NRL right now, and the Warriors are part of none of it. And that's just a good thing to savor at the moment.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some things, because you mentioned Shaun Johnson doing a lot of kicking. It feels like Shaun Johnson in this Dragons game is just going to be able to absolutely control things off his boot, because The Dragons, I can tell you, are 15th out of 17 teams for run meters, total run meters. They are 15th out of 17 teams for post contact run meters, and they are 16th out of 17 teams for kick return meters. So
Are the Seagulls still
basically,
last?
if you pick them deep, sorry, who's what?
Last week it
Which
was
one?
about Seagulls were last for kick return meters. Are they still last for
Right.
kick return meters?
Um, Let me check. They are still last for kick
Right.
return meters by, yeah, it's a decent margin, but they might be catching up to the Dragons because they're not doing anything. So yeah, they're if you do it, complete a decent set, make 40 to 50 meters and kick from just inside the half, and then set the Dragons up inside their 20, they're not getting out. They're not going anywhere with that. You're just going to keep them kicking from inside their half the whole game, and you're going to steadily win that arm wrestle, go closer and closer, and then you just pick on their left edge defensively, and just what's the last next scores a couple tries, and there you go. Like, there's a simple formula to doing that.
It's like thinking back, the Warriors patiently grinded the Seagulls down. And heading into that game, I did say the Seagulls were last for kick return meters. So you can see how they work together. We're going to grind down the Seagulls, keep kicking down their end. They're not going to make many meters. We will make hay as the game goes on. That is amplified a few times against the Dragons, because the Dragons, they don't make post-contact meters, they don't make run meters, and Tyrell Sloan is going to be picked up and driven back every time he returns a kick. So the thing to watch out for as far as practical things is that the Dragons will start their set of 6. They will be tackled, first tackle in the 20 meters every time. And if you do that 10 times in a half, 10 to 15 times maybe in a whole game, it adds up. And that's where you're going to see the Warriors just grind down the Dragons.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got a thing here for errors, but I'm guessing I don't know. I actually don't know where the Dragons would be on errors, but well, it's a conversion percentage. Here we go. Oh no, wait, that's kick conversions. Okay, wrong one. Possession. They are 8th in possession. Around about one of the many teams have hovering around that 50% mark. So they don't make too many more errors compared to their opposition, but they don't need to make errors if they're running off their line, do they? You're already in bad position.
Have you gone to errors, stats, errors?
No, because it doesn't have it on the generic page that I ended up on.
Oh, hold on a second. So we'll go errors. The Dragons are 11th for errors, so they're not that bad. Warriors are 12th for errors. Another stat to watch out for, and this is another tip for the bandwagon. That was my latest Warriors yarn. The Warriors, they don't offload. They are 17th for offloads.
Interesting.
So whatever racial stereotype you've got about Warriors footy and offloads and Ali Lauatiti, that doesn't happen with this Warriors team. So keep an eye on that one. As far as other interesting bits and bobs in the NRL, can't see the Eels defeating the Panthers tonight, Thursday night, but if they do, Dylan Brown's going to be one of the best players on the field. So I'd like to see that happen. Other big games, Raiders versus Broncos, that's a big game. Broncos had the bye last round, and they have tightened up their rotation. There's just Jordan Ricky there for their Kiwi NRL funk. Knights versus Sharks is another top 8 humdinger. And Leo Thompson's in fantastic form. And you've got the regular Sharks, obviously. Greg Mazu did say on the Variety Show, maybe the sub-pod. Hat-trick of hat-tricks last week. Greg Mazu, Will Warbrick, and Dallin Waitane-Zelezniak, all from Aotearoa. No Australian did that, let alone 3 Australians. So, we're out here. I did mention NRLW. There is a full preview that you can check out, but the Parramatta Eels are dead last. They've lost all 5 games, and now they bring in Kapua from Taupo. She was playing, this is an interesting idea actually. Kapua was playing for the Bulldogs under 18s, I think it was. And the Bulldogs have been very busy in recruiting players from Aotearoa to go into their Tasha Gale Cup and New South Wales Women Premiership team, but they don't have an NRLW team. So the Bulldogs invest all this money and effort and resource into recruiting players from Aotearoa to then play for other NRLW teams. Because the Bulldogs don't have an NRLW team, but they are, fair play to them. It's actually a bit weird considering that the Bulldogs, they've kicked out all their Kiwi NRL players in the NRL team. So I'd love to see the Bulldogs suck even more because there's no Hayes Perham, there's no Carla Lawapu, there's no Raymond Faitala Mariner. They're all gone, and the Bulldogs still suck. So obviously none of those players were reasons why. So yeah, don't like the Bulldogs. The Dragons had a big win. And they've got the halves pairing, Tyler Nathan Wong, Racing McGregor, talk a lot about Alexis Tawanei. She's still there. And it's going to be Alexis Tawanei versus Georgia Hale in the Dragons versus Titans. Georgia Hale is first for tackles made in the NRLW. Alexis Tawanei from Wellington, she is third. And she's also much younger than Georgia Hale. Maya Hilmawana returns for the Roosters. She's a fantastic big bopper up the middle. She is starting prop. And you've also got, as I said, Tafito Lafa'ali Blackfern. She is playing for the Broncos off the bench. First game this season for her. And the Raiders, they also have a former Blackfern in Shael Robbins-Retty. So that game will feature two former Blackferns coming up against each other. I think Lafa'ali is going to play in the middle. Shael Robbins-Retty, as we know, she's out at left centre for the Raiders. And that's about it. Lyshawn Albert-Jones is promoted to start at edge for the Newcastle Knights as well. In NRLW, you've got, as I said, the Eels are dead last. They haven't won a game yet. Roosters, Knights, Raiders, they are all 4-1 at the top of the ladder. And they all have an abundance of players from Aotearoa. Roosters have Fotu Moala, Otese Pule, Maya Hilmawana. The Knights have Shanice Parker, Abigail Roach, Nita Maynard, Lyshawn Albert-Jones. And the Raiders have Api Nichols, Madison Bartlett, Shael Robbins-Retty, Kiri Hiratina, Matua, and maybe Mackenzie Wiki. Mackenzie Wiki was named on the extended bench for the Raiders this week. Otherwise, I think we can all just chuckle at the mayhem of some of those Australian NRL teams. Like, it's quite funny, especially from the Kiwi NRL perspective. Like, we're out here, we're taking over the NRLW. You got Joey Manu named at fullback for the Roosters this week. Fantastic players on both sides, men and women from Aotearoa, and some very weird Australian NRL antics do not involve players from Aotearoa, so that's great.
Just on that, the hat tricks things as well. To further to that point, I was looking at the top try scorers list, and you've got a three-way tie for first, which in itself is a narrative to follow for the rest of the season too, because that's Della Martinez-Lesniak, Alex Johnston, who's always up there, and Jermaine Asako. So you've got two Kiwis in the top three, all on 21 tries. Michele Ravalawa is on 20. He's Fijian. Dominic Young is on 20. He's English. Then you got Ronaldo Mulatalo on 19. Alofiana Khan Pereira on 19, the other Australian. And then Greg Marzio is on 18. So there's 4 Kiwis in the top 8 and only 2 Australians.
It seems like the a better example.
Feels like the NBA big man thing.
I was going to say,
like, all the Europeans.
It's probably even maybe the Dally M. You're going to have Sean Johnson. You might have some other international players there as well. But it's like the leading try scorers. But if, like, say, Alofiana Khan Pereira, who I think is eligible for Samoa, he might play for Samoa. So then it's like, just list the top 5 again.
The top 5 is Wadnez, Lesniak, Johnston, Isako, Ravalawa, and Young.
So none of those players might play for Australia. Like, Johnston is PNG.
That's right.
So,
there you go.
Like, the leading try scorers in the NRL are not Australians. So that's great. Because as we know, Tigers, Bulldogs, Dragons of no Kiwi NRL funk fame. So shout out the Dragons. You're the only team in the NRL who will not have a player from Aotearoa in your team. I imagine with Ben Murdoch-Masila on the extended bench, he might come in, but otherwise, the Dragons suck and they got no players from New Zealand. All these other teams are absolutely shambolic. Easy to see why. Quick note to finish. Wellington Phoenix, they have an Aussie Cup fixture this weekend. And there's also domestic footy finals. Is that men's and women's Chatham Cup, Kate Shepherd Cup, or?
Yeah, the finals themselves aren't for a couple of weeks because the semi-finals have just happened, so they've sort of set that up. Just so people know, that is Christchurch United are playing Melville in the Chatham Cup final, and it is Western Springs against Wellington United in the Kate Shepherd Cup final. So those will be on the same day. I don't know, probably in about a month, because they'll be after the league seasons are finished, which still have a couple of weeks to go. So they'll come back around to that. But there's some good semi-final. I don't know if you saw the one with Melville beating Waterside Quarry, and then Justin Lagos got I think he's got two goals actually. Yeah, then he went to the crowd, chucked a hoodie on for some reason. I don't know if that was that must have been spontaneous. Like, I don't think that's a planned thing because it just didn't seem to be any point to it. But he's a bit of a character, that dude. He's Christ, I'm trying to remember. I think it's
Colombian.
I think he's got Colombian heritage, yeah, and he's big on the old TikTok. He's done quite well for himself on that. So, he was a fun player to watch, one of many fun players to watch for Melbourne when they were in the National League last year. They're not going to qualify for the National League again this year, but they do have a Chatham Cup final coming up, so that'll be cool.
But the Wellington Phoenix Aussie Cup, do you have like some preview notes for that? I do encourage anyone, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter. Lots of Flying Kiwis information, lots of video clips, got a big Flying Kiwis yarn. So there's plenty of Aotearoa footballers doing great things around the world. But here and now, to finish the podcast, how are you feeling about the Wellington Phoenix heading into an Aussie Cup, game? Is it a finals game? What's happening? Squad stuff, style of play? What do you reckon?
Yeah, round of 16. Away to Melbourne City. It'll be a 4 p.m. kickoff New Zealand time. So an afternoon game in Melbourne, which is, this time of year, that's not so bad. So they snuck through their first game. I would expect we see a bit of a stronger lineup against Melbourne City, but it is like only the second time we'll have them in action under Chiefy's leadership. So there will be that sort of. I settled on calling it a 4-2-4 formation, and then you get like the fullbacks tucking in rather than pushing wide to sort of help out the midfield with two wingers and two number 9s across the top. So you got the most width is at the top of the line. So that's a different thing to how they've been operating in the past, where they kept their fullbacks wide, looking to overlap, and didn't really get too much of that because they weren't working those spots so much. But it's a different look to how they've played in the past, and this is going to be a big test because Melbourne City are really good, and it's the third year in a row that they've been drawn against Melbourne City in the Aussie Cup. I think they won 2 years ago on penalties. Last year, I think they got knocked out by Melbourne City, but I might have that wrong. I'm not sure. So it will be a tough test, but it's also effectively a preseason game as well as a cup game. So and they haven't signed anyone since the last one. Like, there hasn't been that last import spot is still open. Haven't done anything with that. So it'll be similar to last time, but I would imagine maybe you get David Ball missed that last game. Maybe he comes back in if he's fit again. Not sure about Ben Old's situation. But we'll see how that goes. They had 5 guys in the New Zealand under-23 squad that's going to Olympic qualifiers, which are going to be hosted in Auckland, and I think next week. It's coming up soon. So there were 5 guys in that squad who have all been released from the Olympic squad. They're going to miss the first game for the under-23s there, so that because they've been called up to the travelling squad for the Phoenix here. So that's like Finn Sermon and Kelly Heald and dudes in that sort of caliber. So we'll see how they go. It would be nice to get another good Aussie Cup run. They've made it past at least the first. Like they've won a game in this competition for I think 3 years in a row, where they'd only won one in like 8 years before that. So they're getting better at this thing. Um, but a little bit skeptical how they're going to go, because it is a bit. Last time they played against an NPL team, this time they're up against the premiers from last year and the beating grand finalists. So it's a different story with a rebuilding, not fully rebuilding, but I guess recalibrating squad. They've changed the coach, they've changed the style a bit, a few different sort of points of attack. It's a good opportunity to see where that's at, but it will be difficult to get a result against a strong Melbourne City team. But anything can happen at this stage of the season, and anything can happen in cup footy anyway. So it'll be a fun test to see where they're at.
Same as the kind of Tall Blacks for the USA, are there any other key indicators you're looking for coming into this game ahead of the season, as far as like ticking boxes, getting things on your checklist?
Well, I think just the shot tallies will be interesting, because I think with the last game, the against Peninsula Power, I was more sort of just looking for how they played rather than how well they played. I just wanted to see what the new coach's ideas looked like, and so you get a bit of an idea of that. But they also took them 120 minutes to beat a team from a lower grade, right? And admittedly it was match fitness wasn't there, and there were a lot of young dudes involved in the squad, so it wasn't Phoenix at full steam ahead or anything like that. But I will say I like the idea of how they're setting up, but we didn't actually see that much in terms of like chances, clear chances, shots on target. Quite a few shots, but a lot of them were blocked. But that's also kind of the thing when you do play against a weaker team. They will just sit back and try soak you up a fair bit and get bodies between the ball and the goal. And there was some of that too. So maybe Melbourne City, who are quite a possession-based team, will be a bit more like, they'll play a higher defensive line. And maybe that means the wingers, keeping nice and wide, will have a bit more room to run into, or there'll be more room in the midfield to pass around. Well, there was room to pass in the midfield last time, but it was hard to progress that from the midfield into the attacking third. So maybe there'll be a little bit more space in that kind of way. So that kind of stuff. It's the first game was just how did they play? What did they look like? What was the formation? What were the sort of patterns that you could see them trying to implement? Now it becomes about like, okay, well, you've set the tone, like you've showed us that. Now you're playing against a much better team, but you've also had longer to work on these things. How well can you do this now? Not just what are you doing, but how well can you do this?
Beauty. We'll see how well the Tall Blacks can play basketball. We'll see how well the Blackcaps can play cricket. We'll see how well the Warriors can play rugby league. And we'll see how well the Dragons can do it not having any player in their team from Aotearoa, New Zealand over the weekend. Big up yourself. Official prediction for the Niche Case Derby?
Oh, 40-12
40
to the
12.
Warriors.
2 games with 40 points put on you.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen again.
Rightio, we'll see what goes down at Mount Smart Stadium on Friday night. Big up yourself. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Cheer, cheer.